All right, so back to work here for me. I had a little bit of lunch, and yeah, I was sort of feeling a little sleepy, but now I just really want to keep going and evaluate this very last Brev score by Trey. And yeah, it's just, another enchanting score. Such great ideas. And, it's interesting how orchestration is a tool for expressing and finding meaning in something, isn't it? So each of us is expressing the meaning that they see in the piano score of this work, and just increasing it and expressing it in different ways. For some people it's a triumphant ending. For some people it's a incredibly subtle ending, like we just heard. And there are just different ways of adapting this work that can express the viewpoint of the orchestrator, or their life experience or perspective. It's just really fantastic to see all these different approaches. And sometimes a perspective can be something that is like wholly fictitious. Like I can put myself into the shoes of a fictional character if I want to write an opera about them, right? I don't actually have to live the life that they lived, right? Like Verdi wrote Tosca, but obviously, he wasn't Tosca, right? And so the same thing, we're kind of doing the same thing here. We're imagining, we're putting ourselves into the perspective of Lili, and then expanding upon that, exalting that with orchestral music. So I just feel that, especially that is at work here. Trey, however your imagination or your life experience has kind of informed your orchestration approach, I can just really see it at work in this arrangement. So let's get started here with the beginning. And like I was mentioning, one or two evaluations ago, I don't think it's necessary to really bring this up to mezzo forte. I feel that that's in such a short space, that is just a really big surge. Da 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 da. Right? Maybe better just to leave out the mezzo fortes and just have something more like da 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 da. And then piano to forte. That's brilliant, right? That works perfectly. And I feel that this is just a very strong strings only, if you count the harp as a string instrument. This is a very strong strings only opening, right? It's interesting, you go to poco vibrato at the end. And, I don't know if that is all that necessary either, because I don't think that people would be overdoing the vibrato on the last bar, right? I don't think they'd be going, yeah. I don't think that you would hear that kind of expression. In fact, I think that they would just follow the dynamic here and tend to lessen the expression of it. However, you could always go with non-vibrato and see how that works. But I understand what you're trying to do here. I'm not saying that it's wrong. Just asking you, think about it, right? When you score something like that, whether or not going into a diminuendo like this, whether it's really all that necessary. I really love the simplicity of this. Just how the harp is just kind of hitting the top of the melody, just playing, ascending, just like everybody else. So, as you might have heard in some other evaluations by now, hope that you are watching the other evaluations and commenting, the harp should definitely be marked up compared to the other instruments. So I would really mark this like mezzo piano to, molto forte at the very least, right? if not fortissimo. Because remember, you just have one, like these are just single strings. They're not like chords or glissandos or rolls or anything like that. They are they are just these tiny little notes that are plucking along the top of very warm, lush strings. So they've got to be brought out, right? Either that or else bring the string level down a little, but you don't need to do that. It's perfect the way it is. This is really cool, the way that you sneak in the double basses right underneath this texture. That's so cool. And just a kind of comment for people who are kind of falling in love with niente, this is so much better than like a little circle on the crescendo mark going into forte. This is so much better, pianissimo, right? Or triple P, to push into that, because that's just more realistic, right? Niente is really something that should be avoided using unless you really absolutely intend to get the audience to listen to the niente, right? Okay, so that's really pretty much all I've got to say about the first 8 bars, and just really nicely done there, Trey. Yeah. So now we're getting into the main part of the piece, or just sort of the intro, and then the little development. Da 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 da. Now, which instrument is the stronger? Answer, right? It really is the oboe in this register. So, by giving the flute the actual melody and having the oboe play the little harmony note here, you basically are obliterating the harmony, right? So it would be better for the oboe, like just to switch these two staves, right? Have the oboe play and the flute go do 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 do, and then you'll hear the melody come through there really clearly. But keep in mind, in the piano score, it isn't da 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 da. It's da 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 da. There is no tie, right? So just like I'd say, get rid of the tie, switch these two, and then everything would be just perfect here. And then, of course, pizzicato and harp playing the sort of plucked bass down here. That all works great. No problems there. And now you're responding with ba 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 bum, and then exactly the same notes, but soft. Bum 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 bum. So that all works with me. Notice how, like, in some of the other scores, there have been differences of register, of articulation, and of scoring, right? But here it's just dynamics, just the dynamic difference. And that's fine if you want that, if you want that particular approach. That's cool with me. It's kind of strange how these slurs go past the note that they are slurring to. The only thing that I would observe about this is, do we really want da, da, or do we want da, da, right? Do you want to tongue on the downbeat? Anyway, just something to think about there. Okay. Soft mallet on the cymbals is all good. You sort of have a boosh sound there. Now, bum, 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 bum. Something? I am just going to transpose here. Right, so I'm just so much easier to read the instruments transposing rather than in C. Yeah, just like you just get used to it. Then, of course, like sometimes you have to justify things horizontally because of rests and, of accidentals going across the bar. Okay, so let's go back to this part. So do you really want your brass to go? Do you really, or I mean, it's an awful long stretch for your for your instruments to be going without tonguing fresh, right? So da da. I mean, you could actually just get rid of all the slurs. Dun 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 dun. Or you could like slur some and not others. Da 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 da. Or da da da. So really just think about the implications of sticking a big slur over everything, right? That's more of a pianistic thing. But, just like sing things, right? Sing lines as you go to just, to see to to see whether or not like you are taking away emphasis from downbeats. I mean, that's really kind of the main concern, right? So like music that really is highly rhythmic like this sometimes needs the coincidence of the melody to hit at the same time as like the it needs to be tongued, not just slurred to, right? Okay. But other than that, just kind of looking at the scoring of this, I feel that it's fine. It's kind of cool scoring. I would say like just so long as everybody really is playing softly, then this is going to balance. But if you had followed the same dynamic as the piano score and scored this like mezzo forte down to piano, then I would say double up the horns, right? Just have the same part in both staves, right? So that you have A2 on the top line and the bottom line. And that way, the dynamically, it can compete with the trombones and trumpets, okay? But at a softer dynamic, that works great. Just the horns being the middle voice right in there. Okay. Now, we're going to the next part. Yeah, so so do we really want da da da, or do you want da 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 da? I mean, I feel like the stress goes in a weird place just with the way that this is slurred, especially when you consider that all the other instruments are bowing right on this note, right? Maybe if this, like if you want the bowing to be regular, you could slur across to this note and then just get rid of this slur, and then no slurs, and then everybody slurring the same way there, right? And then I don't know if you remember, but in the piano score, the slur is across four notes. So like these four notes are kind of what Lili is doing here is she's actually taking 3 bars of 4 beats, or 3 phrases of 4 beats each, and she is putting them across 3 bars of 4/4, right? So excuse me, 3 phrases of 4/4 are being expressed in 4 bars of 3/4. So I'm just thinking that we sort of lose that when you basically start a bowing right on the downbeat right here. But I mean that's kind of all I had to say about that. But I like this. I like the dynamic arc right in here, and I like the fact that the horns are so beautifully in the background, and yet they give so much warmth to the strings, right? And this is really, really nicely done. Now here, did you notice that everything sounds like chromatic? And that is because the playback, the mock-up, is basically expressing, like it's taking these glissando lines and it is expressing just like a white key glissando. That is really what the gliss line does in Sibelius. It basically just expresses, it does not express the tuning of the of the key signature. So what you need is this little plugin right here, which you can download from the Sibelius.com website, and that is Harp Gliss, right? So basically, all you have to do is just select two pitches. So I'm selecting this one, and then I'm command clicking or control clicking on the second pitch. Then I go to Home, I go to Plugins, and then I click on Harp Gliss, and then here, like, input or edit harp tuning, right? So I could just like say, okay, so if I want this all to be in the key of B, right, I would just add C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, right? And then if there were any other any other sharps that aren't in the key signature, like E sharp, I could also add that, just with the pound sign or the hash mark, however you want to put it, right? And you have your choice of like whether you want to play the last note, or whether or not you want to just leave the last note as to play back as the next note in sequence. Do you want to show the tuning as text, show it as a diagram, which I highly recommend. Just the harp diagrams are just the fastest. Or not to show any tuning, right? And then after you click that, you get a bunch of little MIDI code in grayscale above the glissando, which tells the playback to play back those notes, right? Anyway, so that way you can get your mock-ups to have glissando. Now, you may wonder why I'm just taking this time out to talk about that, and that is, like, when I first started doing these challenges and I started evaluating people's scores, I was coming from the perspective of a pro orchestrator who almost never had to mock anything up. I'd spent about maybe 10 years, 12 years since really doing serious mock-ups. And I'd done a bunch of mock-ups for different projects where I knew we would just never get the musicians together. Those are mainly for like dance companies, little film projects and things like that. But then, just like even in my own work, working like kind of broadening my sphere a little bit and working with, on multimedia projects, working more with crossover scoring, where you have to deal with an artist who wants to sing along to the arrangement or hear how the orchestra is going to fit into their band and everything else. I got back into taking mock-ups more seriously, right? And that is why I just feel that I should not feel, I should definitely talk about it when it's relevant as an actual tool, right? Not as an end in itself, but as something that you can use as part of your work. Okay, and now just like looking at the really long slurs, this is all fine too, but I mean, I don't even know if any slurs are necessary right here, right? If this is just a background to the texture of the strings, then nobody's really going to hear the finesse of all of these notes connecting together. And, while legato in brass is definitely possible, it's not, using it kind of like as an end in itself, right? With so many really long slurs is not necessarily like the easiest thing on the player, right? Or right here just does not matter how long these slurs are at all, right? Or even if there are any slurs. So when it doesn't matter whether they exist or not, leave them out, because it's just easier to play for the player. Okay, so now da 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 bum. So here we definitely have got a problem, all right? Because just by the very nature of having these other little slurs, it kind of makes me think that you are thinking in terms of adding a phrase mark to your wind parts. And just, okay, I'm forgetting to mention that like you really need to tell us how many of each you are scoring for in your winds and brass and so on and so forth, right? So we have to know, is this first flute, second flute, which flute, right? Or is it with both flutes? Same thing here. Kind of need to know how many people are involved if there is just a single line. Okay, so right in here, it's not just that the flute is really weak right in here and kind of won't be heard until right around this C or D, C sharp or D. It's also basically just that, like, it really seems as if this is a copy paste from the piano part, and you're not really thinking about, like, breathing as being something that phrases, right? That it's like an elemental form of phrasing that has its, has its own kind of identity, right? So like the player has got to, the player like starts breathing here and then they just keep breathing. So as long as you've got that slur mark, right? So here, this kind of suggests that there is, more to it, right? That you actually wanted to connect these with breath. So what does that say about this? If you want things legato, you don't put a slur over. You just say P legato, right? And then the player will connect everything, but they don't actually even need to slur from note to note. They could actually tongue everything separately, but just still play in a really legato style. Okay, so just be warned about that. That's when I see slur under slur, it just makes me concerned about the orchestrator, knowing about how breath works, and tonguing and breath and melisma and everything like that. Okay, all right. So this is cool. Da 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 da. Turn the page, and this is so great. Da soft. All right. That. I think this is the only score so far that I've seen, like right at this bar. I guess bar 30. The instead of getting louder, you get softer, and that way the resolution right here in the harp, with just a little pizzicato under it, just seems so perfectly natural. Yeah, so just really well done, Trey. Such a great idea there. However, I am going to twit you here a little bit about using upward pointing arrow rolls, okay? So you are not doing any downward arrow rolls, right? You're not rolling downward anywhere in this piece, correct? So there's absolutely zero reason to use an upward pointing arrow roll. Do not use this sign unless there is a downward arrow roll to contrast it with. And especially not in just a piece like this, where it's a fairly short piece, and the harpist is going to be looking around and thinking, like, okay, there's an upward roll, where's the downward roll go? And I would be thinking that as a pianist if this were a piano part, right? Like, where's the downward roll? And then I would sort of realize to myself, oh, right. They think they need an upward roll, right? So just that tiny little bit of effort, by putting an upward roll on here, you are just adding to somebody's store of unnecessary things that they had to look at in their entire life of performing, okay? So don't score an upward pointing roll unless there is a downward pointing roll that you need to, like, it's almost like a cautionary, right? Like where you have to go back to sharps if there's been a natural in the previous bar and you're in B major, like this piece, right? So it's the same exact thing. Just have a standard roll mark here without an arrow on it if all you mean is that you're going to roll upwards. Okay, now I've said this, I actually have a tip on this in 100 More Orchestration Tips. Please read it. Okay, and you're one of my Brev patrons. You should have a copy of this book. If you don't have a copy of this book, just go back and I think you can search it in our posts under 100 More Orchestration Tips, and there's a link for you to download the book for free. But read the tip, and please, everybody, stop using upward roll marks if all you're doing is just the normal kind of rolling, right? In which case, the normal roll mark is what you need to use. Okay. All right, so moving onwards, I really love this right in here. It's just, yeah, what it really reminds me of is like the flower duet from Lock Me. It's like, it's what by Deleve. It really reminds me of that, which I think is actual beautiful piece. I actually arranged it for the punk rock orchestra. And yeah, and like it's just like we had like just the tiniest orchestra, and like a lot of the members were people who actually like joined the orchestra so that they could work off a traffic ticket. Now, that's one of the great things about San Francisco, right? So you could work off your traffic ticket by playing for the punk rock orchestra, and then people would stay in the orchestra afterwards. So a lot of people were just kind of like amateur level musicians, and and that duet just still sounded beautiful. Well, this has some of that same beautiful like rocking motion to it, as da 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 ba da 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 da. We still have those same. You have the restatement of the melody. And yeah, I really love it. It's just really well done. There's nothing wrong with the scoring in here. It's all good, right? The balance is great. The assignment of the parts is great. It's all fine with me. Okay, and cool little timpani kind of stuff happening in here. All right, and then climbing up to mezzo forte again. And my man, mezzo forte against mezzo piano, that is it. Exactly right. Except you might even want to start with pianissimo, right? Or end with pianissimo, maybe better. Yeah, and then just this lovely climbing up here. Yeah, just end with pianissimo. Everybody else piano. It's all good. And your harp needs to be louder. Okay, so no problems there. Okay. Now, going on. We're going into this rhapsodic section where Lili is kind of like storing the memory. It's almost like the act of remembering something forever, of just like standing there looking at something beautiful and saying, I am going to preserve this in my memory. It's almost just like, an upload, right? Or a download. Let's call it a download. So a download of something into your memory, that moment, that wonderful kind of rapture, expectation, and everything else, and also the little bit of time travel, is all, where that would just be like the most boring, normal thing for a computer to do. For us, it is this it can be very a beautiful emotional moment, and I feel that that's really what this is. It's just like the wonderful hush over the world as Lili is looking out and just like knowing she's never going to forget this day, right? So it's so great that everybody is just putting everything they can into scoring this. Now, what's really a crime is that the playback engine of Sibelius doesn't really understand forte piano. Like sometimes I've got it to work and sometimes it just doesn't work. So I guess I'll have to figure that out as I go. But yeah, so like, all you hear is just like loud, and then suddenly it drops off to mezzo forte in your mock-up. So if you really want this to work, I really recommend to have like a 16th note that is forte, and then a dotted eighth tied to whatever value continues onwards, that is soft, and then crescendo, right? Because otherwise you just won't get that effect. So that would just be for your mock-up, not for your actual score. Okay? So, I mean, it's a kind of an accent, isn't it? Like forte piano. I really think of it as a very exaggerated accent. In a sense, kind of just like the hardest accent you would want to put on a softer note, right? Okay, so bum 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 bum. Kind of interesting that you keep your heavy brass like soft, and then you swell underneath it with your accompaniment. And I kind of understand the whole philosophy here is like you are imagining that the heavy brass are going to be really powerful, and especially when you have a deux, a two on the trombones, and you put that weight together against the horns and the strings, then you will end up with a balance there. And that is actually kind of the way that it sounds in the mock-up. But I still think you need a little bit of a oomph in there. So what I would do here is I would actually just mark everybody the same way and not worry about it too much, right? I would have a, bum 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 bum. I would have a little bit of a crescendo in here, maybe piano to forte or piano to mezzo forte, and not worry so much about just really the kind of really minute dynamic mixing, right, that I'm seeing in here. Okay. The other thing too is like how much do you want to use the same strategy in a row, right? So right, like here it's more additive, right? Like the tremolo continues on, and it doesn't really change until we get here, right? And the brass start to take over more and more on the accompaniment, and I think that's really cool. That is a kind of evolution. It feels like the same thing, just getting bigger and bigger each time, but it isn't actually, right? So I mean, I would say that is an acceptable approach. That's fine. I don't have any problem with it, and I really like the way that you are thinking about the scope getting bigger and bigger each time, bigger dynamics and everything else. I would say that, like, the only problem that I have here is that the dynamics stay the same in the accompaniment parts, while the while the juicier parts, the melody and the little cascading parts, get louder and louder, right? So I would say just like maybe let your accompaniment breathe a little bit and also catch up with everything else that's going on, right? And I think like maybe don't use the forte piano crescendo thing too many times in a row. Otherwise, it just starts to get to be too predictable, right? You don't want your strategy to start attracting attention, right? It's kind of like, let's call this like your hit single right here, right? Everything is set up absolutely perfectly, brilliant, sounds great. Your solo trumpet plus your two trombones, and then this beautiful swell here, and the forte piano at the beginning, and then you have your cascading woodwinds going down, very nicely dovetailed, if I may say so. All right, and then you ask your imagination, like, what do I do next, right? And your imagination in this case, maybe it's a little bit like it's just really excited about what happened, almost like the audience of a rocker who's just had to cut a really successful hit single, right? So you want to do it again. So you sort of do it again in a more evolved way, some of the same approaches. Really more I'm talking about the forte piano and everything else, right? Right, and so like it's just dangerous to, like, after a while it kind of starts to sound the same, right? Like that rocker, right? So I would say, like, as you evolved your texture in here, I would say, like, just go for it and really evolve things even more, right? Like, how much can you increase the scope and, experiment with the colors getting more and more complex and more intense, right? That's what I would propose to, in order to make this, like, even more of what you are aiming for. But I would sort of lay off of, like, using certain kinds of things like forte piano crescendo too many times in a row. Okay, all right, but it's all put together really nicely. Like the oboes and clarinets sort of wending their way down into the lower winds. Same kind of thing again. So almost really identical in the first 8 bars. Okay, then we get to our next group of 4 bars. Now the horns are taking over with some celesta. So here we're getting into the danger of the horns just totally outplaying the celesta, right? Because, like, celesta is a soft instrument, right? It just is so subtle. And, to have mezzo forte brass underneath your celesta, I think is possibly a mistake, right? The place for the most delicate kind of playing is really earlier in the game, right? Now, right here, just the overtones of the horns alone will absorb that beautiful ringing sound of the celesta, especially on these lower pitches, right? might be better, like if you just really want Celesta there, to make this go up an octave and mark the Celesta forte, right? Like it just, if you really have to have those sounds. But there's still going to be, they still have to compete with a lot of this high end right in here. You got, flute and oboe, the second players and so on, and it's just kind of complicating matters, right? Okay, but all that said, we've got flute plus oboe. We still have clarinets underneath that, and they're all sort of working their way down. Kind of getting higher and higher here with the bassoon, but still in a comfortable place. Okay, now we're really going for this, really pushing the horns higher, and I'm wondering if this is meant to be like all four horns playing at once, like if you were to write A2 on both parts, then that would clear things up. But I'm still really not sure if this is just meant to be like first and third, right? So that just really would help me. So you've got that, plus you've got triple octave, double octave, octave strings. Which double octave doesn't mean anything. And then you've got piccolo and flute, kind of all playing together there. And I actually really like the way that this is all working out, and I love the way that it's like piano, mezzo forte accent. Like I think you can just go for it and score this loud, right? Like what I was saying before, just like let your process of evolution get even more intense. So I would say just go ahead and boost this, right? Don't pussyfoot around. Just really commit to it, right? And and then of course draw back, and then let these little cascading notes in here do their thing. Right now, like this is, I'm not sure. Let's see, where's this piano supposed to? I think that's attached to the harp. All right, okay, so that does not make any sense in terms of balance, right? You don't want your harp to be soft and your winds to be loud. Nobody's going to hear the harp at all, so the harpist might as well just not play anything, right? The harp should be, in order to be heard in these passages, the harp should be like fortissimo, right? And then you'll actually get a little bit of blending. It won't be a lot, but you'll be able to hear a little bit of harp in there. The same thing is true for Celesta. Like, these big, huge, soaring melodies do not work very well with Celesta at all. So, saying that, let's take a look at the very next page, in which we see the last 7 bars. Now here is a great use of Celesta, right? You've got all of these artificial harmonics forming just a really beautiful, kind of haunting, glowing background. And a little bit of rolled cymbal, soft rolled cymbal, and just a touch of pizzicato. And then you will hear this Celesta just ring out beautifully. Pling, plink, 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 plink. And just a little bit of horn in the background, just playing its little counter melody. So that is so lovely, just haunting, just really kind of like twilight or some other kind of beautiful time of day when the wonderful afternoon outside has come to an end, and and this is so clever right in here, the enharmonically doubling that low B with a C flat with using the C string to play along with the B flat. Okay, so very, very cool. I'm bringing up a lot of points, not necessarily possible objections, but just points of craft, right? So you can add those points to your stack of things to think about, like as you go on and score more music. But one thing is for sure, I just really am interested to see where you are going with this orchestration that you're doing, and I would love to see you participate again in next year's orchestration challenge. So, and even like maybe work through this score, see what you can fix, and see if maybe there's an orchestra that would want to read it or perform it. Who knows? You know what I mean? It's just like some really great ideas. I would just say, like, watch out for the interconnectivity, watch out for the balance of dynamics, and like don't waste a note. right? If there is anything that you are scoring in there, like those low flutes, a couple of pages back, that like is not going to be heard, just leave it out, right? Just really try to go for the maximum amount of effect for the minimum amount of effort, the minimum amount of notes, right? And you can't go wrong. And that is especially true for the harpist, right? Don't give the harpist anything to learn that takes a lot of time and is not going to be heard very clearly by the audience. And Celesta, of course, is going to have to be dealt with. It's, it is like baby music, right? So it has to be handled like a baby, right? It's like that little tinkly, beautiful little kind of nursery sound. That you can hear that when, like when everybody else is hushed, right? So the baby can sleep, right? So kind of that's one way of kind of thinking about when to put in Celesta. So yeah, I mean, just wow, another gifted score, another great effort. I just felt like all these Brev scores were just fantastic and really put me on my, like on my form as a coach, just really having to give you the best that I could. And so I hope that that brings our Brev entries to an end. And what's left now is the dotted Brev / Longa entries that are going to come up. But before I move on to that, I just want to say, Trey, I just really appreciate your support of the channel. I really, I'm fascinated by your insights, your progress, your outlook as an orchestrator, and would love to see more of it someday. And if you have got any feedback to give to some of the other participants, especially here at the Brev level, please do. I know that they would appreciate it, and I'm sure that you're going to get some comments on this probably in the YouTube, under the YouTube, on the YouTube page, I should say, and possibly in the Patreon feed, okay? So, thanks again, and now for me, on to the next level.